Hey, it's Alex. I'm actually doing a bit of a different video for Sunday, May 17th. As you may recall, on March 9th, I did a podcast, video cast, in Times Square the first weekend of the major closings here in New York. Well, today I'm back outside, not necessarily in the city, staying away from that for the moment, but I'm here to tell you things are opening up. People are moving around. Things are getting better. We're going to get through this. People are going to heal. And we do mourn the loss of loved ones as well. And this is why I brought on Jan Hurst. She's actually the author of His Sunrise, My Sunset, about the loss of her husband in a car accident in Texas. Jan Hurst. And she's also a military widow, so we'll get into that. And so, Jan, welcome to my podcast videocast today. Jan, how are you doing in South Texas or in Texas today?
We're doing great, except that we have a storm coming in. So hopefully it won't get interrupted here.
Well, let's talk. So we had met the National Publicity Summit, and you have a story of overcoming loss that became a movie.
Yes.
Tell us your story.
Well, my husband and I had just retired, and we were looking forward to traveling, and we were on a trip in Kentucky, actually, and a semi hit us and my husband was killed. So it abruptly changed my retirement life for sure. And I actually wrote the book to, I guess, share my story. I mean, everybody has a story. It's not that I have this spectacular story, but I think that sharing it has helped some people to understand that they can reflect on their own lives, and that things happen to everybody, but we can help each other get through it.
Well, and it's such a message you need now, right? So people should get the book at this time to overcome loss.
Yes, I think that's probably true. I think it's, the big thing is that none of us plan for major events like the loss of a loved one. And I think even if you have someone ill for a long time and you know that maybe they're not going to survive, it's still, at the time that they actually pass away, it's very, very final. And I think that's the abruptness to it, is that it's not one of those things you can just do over. Your house can blow away, you can rebuild it, but when you lose somebody, I mean, your life is now totally changed, and accepting that is really hard.
Jan, your story was so moving, it became a movie, right? So tell us about that process as well.
I am a person of pretty deep faith, and there had been a few faith-based movies that I thought were touching and getting a message out of why faith was important to hold on to. It certainly helped me. I really thought that, well, so many people had said, gee, that'd be a really good faith-based movie. And so I tried to contact the people in Atlanta, basically, that had started doing some of the faith-based movies. And they now have gotten so big that they weren't accepting new authors or people to contribute new stories, so because they have enough of their own. But I did get a website of people in California that were seeking new authors for producers that want to do these kinds of stories to help people. And so I went to LA and got introduced to these producers, and actually got to go when we filmed the movie. So it was really great.
Well, and it's called Sunrise from Heaven, and people could still find that. And where can they buy the book? Is it Amazon?
Yeah, the book's on Amazon or Barnes and Noble. Yeah, I mean, it's on Kindle and it's on Nook, so they could, even get the ebook.
When you first suffered this, did you know it would be a book? Like, what was the process toward writing it? Because that's got to be a tough story to share.
It's a tough story to share, but actually, I had worked very hard to get my doctorate because I had been in management for over 30 years, and I wanted to write management books. I wanted, especially for women, because I had come up through some struggles. My husband was in the military, so I had started over 5 times, and I thought I could help some women in their careers by writing some, more inside management books for women. But we had our accident, and I just couldn't focus on that anymore. And actually, What had happened was the 3 days they kept my husband alive, I kept reflecting back on our life together and just, all the things that kept us going through challenges we had or fun times or whatever it was. And a few years after the accident, I kept waking up with that, what I had been reflecting on. I guess you hear people say when someone's dying, their life passes before them. Well, my husband was dying. Our life together passed before me. And that really is what culminated to be the book. I kept waking up with it, and I just felt that I had to write it down. I ultimately wasn't really writing it to publish a book, but that's where it went.
And so you had kids as well, right? So how were they through the loss? This loss they had?
My daughters were grown and married, and I had grandchildren by then because we had just retired. My daughters were actually very helpful. I wound up a year after I lost my husband, I was going to go get a condo. I really was not comfortable still in the house, and people are very different. We're all individuals. Some people like the comfort of their house that they've had, but we had not lived there that long. I mean, maybe about 5 years, but ultimately my son-in-law said, no, you're not. We lived next door, and I had a special needs granddaughter, and he said, no, we're going to go buy a house together. So we wound up buying a house together. And I was able to be closer to my grandkids. We had the house so that I had my space, and I left them to have their space, let them have their meals together in that. My other daughter was in New York, in Syracuse, and so I don't get to see her as often, but of course she was there when her dad passed away because they, we had time with them keeping him alive that they could get there. So she was very comforting because she's a doctor, and so she was helpful to me with things I just didn't know. Like I never knew there was an end of life doctor, but she knew of that, and they had one at Vanderbilt, and so she was very helpful, I will say.
Jan, obviously in this time, a lot of people, millions, are suffering loss right now. But
Yes.
With respect to your story, and maybe you can teach people how not to speak to someone losing a loved one through this. Like, were you spoken to awkwardly when they say, hey, sorry for your loss? Like, how can we talk to people dealing with loss right now?
Right. I think that it is awkward, and people are afraid. I saw two major things happen. There were some people who would not approach me, and I think because they were afraid they would say something and I would cry. But you know what? It's okay to cry. Mm-hmm. And I think that's another thing. We tend to apologize. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm crying. Well, no, you have a right to cry when you lose somebody. The other one was that people feel they have to say something. You know what? You don't have to say anything. And I know right now it's hard because our whole culture is changing with touch, but I will tell you that hugs meant much more to me than most of the words that people said, or just a quick note, but people try to say something, so they say too much. And I think that is what is more tender to you, what really kind of stabs you. I had one lady, I know she was trying to make me feel better, but she said, well, at least, this isn't as bad as losing your child. And I thought, you know what? That really isn't very comforting at the moment. I'm sure that, that may be true, but I don't think you can compare losses. I really think that's a really bad direction to go, because no, I would never want to lose one of my daughters. But at the time I was living daily with my husband. I wasn't with my girls, and it's a different situation. So it was just very hurtful to hear something like that. Or, oh, I know exactly what you're going through. No, you don't. I know that you're hurting. But do I know exactly what you're going through? No, because we're individuals and our relationships are different.
Jan,
our losses are different.
As I've lost a couple, my two grandmothers the last year and a half and all that, I'm realizing it's our time to carry on their legacy. So along with the book and along with the movie, have you found other ways to carry his legacy on even through this time?
Well, I think that, and the book kind of came after I was very involved in, I had started in a Sunday school that was for widows, and it kind of turned into work in a ministry. And so the book was an extension, I guess, of that ministry, because I think that what many people said to me was, many of the widows especially, was that they felt that way, but they really had never thought about it to express it, but it was kind of bundled up in there. And so I think that it turned into kind of a ministry. And whether it's, you know, faith-based or not, I think we're humans, and we need each other, and we need to understand each other, and be able to convey that, you know, a little empathy. And
Well, right, yeah, and right now is so crucial for that togetherness that Zoom is kind of the best way to do this.
It is.
And so, I mean, I don't know, how can we console each other through this time?
Well, you know, it sounds kind of trite, but I will tell you that little notes, I mean, mailing somebody a note, or email, or, you know, something like that. Of course, Facebook had started and was available, and just the messages I got from people on Facebook meant so much, just to know they were aware, they were there, they cared, you know.
Jen, you were very upbeat about this story. So how did you pull through that and become sort of more happy in your life?
Well, I truly believe that we're intended to have joy in our life. I just believe that. I've had other things happen. I mean, I was hit by a drunk when I was 33, and I was hurt pretty badly. And, you know, so things happen in our lives we can't control. And I really believe, you know, when people say it's not what happens to you, it's what you do with it, it's how you react. I believe that's true. And I choose to try to find something to keep me going. I will tell you that I was like anybody else. I wanted to go to bed and stay there. It's very easy to just fall into depression, but I know myself, and I knew if I did that, if I let myself do that, that's where I would be. For me, I was doing Bible studies. I mean, it can be whatever, a hobby or something, but I pushed myself to have a target of a focus. And for me, the Bible studies, I had a commitment that I had to show up, I had homework to do, and I had something to focus on. And I think that, you know, that is what pushed me really through at the hardest point. But joy, I think, you know, we're intended to have joy. That doesn't equate to happy all the time. I don't mean it that way, but you know, I do think we can't allow ourselves to just, you know, go into depression. We got to fight it.
No, we do. By the way, Jim, where can people find your story, like Twitter, Facebook? What's your handles?
Well, I'm not on those. I need to get on those, I guess. I'm kind of backwards there, but I do have a website that's not real active. Sadly, my web person passed away too, so I have been having a struggle getting it, but it is the author Jan Hurst blogspot.
Very cool. Well, Jan,
So,
you also, your husband had a military background, correct?
yes, my dad too.
And your dad as well. So how did that shape your lives together?
Well, I guess the interesting thing that the producers liked for the movie was that my dad being in the military, he did not want me to date a GI, and we had moved my senior year, and my husband had been going into the service then because they had the draft then, and he joined the Air Force. And so we had a curious dating experience because he was taking one class, and I told my dad he was a student. So my dad came through the gate and waved him on one day. So we had a really curious story getting started. But then, of course, I had moved my whole life, but I was a stay-at-home mom and went back to school after my younger daughter went to kindergarten. But with him in the military, I started over 5 times because we moved. We'd be someplace, and 3 years later we'd move. So it was interesting to change schools and change jobs and do all that. But I was raised that way, so I guess I'm a little bit more of an adaptive chameleon.
Jan, then this sort of brought up another idea in my mind. I mean, obviously your husband was able to come home, right? So he was deployed. Was he deployed?
He had been. He was not like for a year or more, but in fact, that's one of the things that I share is that was hard with him dying so suddenly, was that he had been gone on deployments for 3 or 4 months, and so you have this mindset that, oh, they're just going to walk in the door, they've just been gone, but yeah, he had been like that, but he had not been to a war zone or anything. So
Well, but for those families that really do have someone overseas, and now you add the COVID lockdown, I mean, there are so many anxious military families. We tend to forget about that, don't we, in the midst of all this conversation?
We really do. I will say that I think it is such a wonderful thing that they do have internet now, and that at the time that my husband was, for instance, he was in Egypt for 4 or 5 months, and we were building a house, and he was gone, and all these little decisions and things like that I couldn't ask him because I would hear from him. I was lucky if I got a letter a week, and he called, I think once a month he was where he could call. And if I missed his call, and a couple of times I did, it was very, very hard to communicate. So they need to take advantage of internet, anything they can use. I think that's wonderful. I think most of them try to do that now, which is definitely a good thing.
And do you know of any outlets for military families to connect during this time?
Because he retired long enough ago, I don't live close to a military installation, but I do know that if they contact their local base, whatever is close to them, or post, whatever service they're in, definitely they have family services that have always been very, very good about helping families stay linked up. They helped me many, many times, and I would not hesitate to look up your family services and give them a call.
Well, a lot of people are trying to reduce the anxiety, so I'm going to ask you the same thing. We've got anxious families waiting for their loved ones to come home, and of course lockdown. What's your encouragement to them today?
Well, I just think that, like I said, for me, it was faith that I held on to, and for my husband. But, I think that worry is just not helpful, because I think you waste your time trying to anticipate something, and then if it doesn't happen, it was all just wasted. But I just think that most people, if they have their family, somehow you've got to keep, if you got little kids especially, you've got to keep them going, and it kind of becomes contagious, and they keep you going if that's the direction that you want to go, and somehow keep them up with their mommy or daddy that's gone, to make sure that they're aware of them every day. Keep that thought going.
Jan, if this accident happened today, and because you were able to spend 3 extra days with him after the accident, is that correct?
Yes, he was not real aware, but yes.
But even so, after the accident, you were able to get to a hospital. We've been told so much today, like, hey, don't go to a hospital for something unless it's COVID related. I mean, how would you have reacted if this happened today, and how families should still go to the doctor today?
Yeah. Our accident was major enough that he was actually airlifted from Bowling Green to Nashville. So, and I was taken to the emergency room in Bowling Green. I think that, I'm not a medical person, but I think there are certain things you have got to get to the hospital. And I know that my daughter, who is a doctor, has said anyway where she is, and I've heard this in Tyler as well, that they're trying to isolate those people that have the virus, it's a shame because the ongoing, less critical things have been put on hold and you can't get normal appointments. But I think an emergency, I mean, there's just no question. You've got to get care. My husband would not have lasted, I don't know, if he hadn't had airlifting, he would have died there, I think. So
How important is it for you to always say I love you to your loved ones in this, with what you've gone through and in today's world?
I think that is so crucial. And, it's interesting that you asked that because one of the things about the end of our relationship was that my husband was so happy. We were on this trip. I just bought him a new Corvette and we were going to meet a Corvette Caravan. He was at the peak of his happiness. We had been together 44 years, but he kept saying how he felt like we had just gotten together, that we were, that we were just fresh newlyweds, and he was just feeling so happy, and we were just so happy. And I've thought so many times, and we did tell each other we loved each other, and I've thought so many times, oh my goodness, how would I feel if we had just had an argument, or I had been mad at him and wasn't speaking to him, or he was mad at me and wasn't speaking to me. I think it's very, very important. It's very true what they say, don't go to bed after an argument and not get it settled.
Especially in quarantine, I mean, this is such a trying time.
It is.
And you had sort of because you guys had this amazing marriage for 44 years, how did you make it last? And how can people make it last today?
Well, for us, we came from very dysfunctional backgrounds, and I think that caused us to have a very special bond because we both, kind of depend on each other so much emotionally. But, we had our times, we had our ups and downs just like everybody else. And, we had our stresses of work and family, and, it wasn't fun every single day by any stretch, but I guess we just felt like, we were married in the sight of God, and we were going to make it work, and it did. We just didn't give up. We just loved each other and tried to focus on remembering that.
Jen,
In fact, we got remarried 3 times.
Wow. Well, and one of the things I think people can actually feel grateful that they have their loved one next to them during this time, hearing your story.
Absolutely. I think, I don't think you can be around anybody all the time and not have a little irritation, because we're all different. But, and as I'm getting older, I'm learning it all the more. You have to just let it go. It's not worth the frustration of worrying about little things. And I guess that's what we learned over time, was you got to worry about the big stuff. You don't have enough energy to worry about the little stuff. It's like, I remember one instructor doing the thing where they put the rocks in the bottle, and they say, well, if you put the little rocks in first, then you don't have room for the big rocks. So they show you that you put the big rocks in first and let the little rocks flow around it. It's kind of like that theory, I think.
Well, this is a Sunday, so I'm airing this on Sunday. And so I've got to ask you, since you're very close with God, do you feel that connection even more in these days?
Well, it's hard because our church is closed.
Right.
And in fact, a few of the churches, we're going to have outdoor services tomorrow, and we're having a storm. This weekend is supposed to be from this afternoon through tomorrow, storm. So, we're watching it on TV. Again, it's like doing this. You do everything through your internet these days. But at least it's connected.
For you?
I'm sorry?
How has the internet worship been for you?
It's odd. It is odd, but because I was in choir and that, and so you have a totally different connection with people. But it's still the message, and I'm a believer. It's not the building. I believe the church is the people. So any way that you can connect with each other, I feel like you're still the church, and you're still together. And when people get ill, they can't go to church. So I think it's wonderful that we have means now that you can at least see it. So
Jen, I've got to ask this because I've sort of been talking with different people over the last couple of weeks. When you had this loss and when you were suffering, I mean, it sounds like you believed in God from the get-go, but did you struggle during the depression with bad habits, and did he help you through those bad habits?
I will tell you one biggie was that at the time when we were at the hospital, because I believe in prayer and I was praying, and I've had other things in my life where I prayed and it didn't turn out the way I thought, and I wasn't real thrilled about it. And then magically things would turn around and they'd be better than what I prayed for. So I guess I was kind of thinking that's how this would work. And we had so many people saying that they had prayer chains and so much going on that way that, I mean, I just prayed and prayed and prayed that there would be a miracle, and there wasn't, but at that time, I will admit, I fell into the loop of thinking, well, wait a minute, maybe I didn't pray hard enough. That it's my fault. I didn't, if I'd have given it my all, and I'd really, I don't know, you kind of take on a different expectation that is wrong. But I will say that I don't think that I took on habits after that, but I felt let down, and and then I felt badly because I realized, and it really wasn't fully until a year later that I totally realized. We went back, my daughters and I, they had, with our family and friends of the Corvette groups, had done a memorial bench for my husband at the museum, at the Corvette Museum. And so we met in Nashville and drove up to Bowling Green to go see this. And one of the directors there, who actually was the first one who came upon our accident too, he was going to lead that caravan we were just ready to do the exit. And, he said to me, he knew my husband had spoken to him about having been diagnosed with Parkinson's, which his dad and my dad both had it at the same time. And my dad was 10 years younger, but he died of a heart attack. And his dad lived out to the end of Parkinson's. And Steve had shared with him that he didn't share with very many people, that, he wanted to go like my dad. He didn't want to live out to the end of Parkinson's. And he said to me, "Did you see the car?" And I said, "No, I didn't want to see the car. My son-in-law, who's an attorney, helped take care of the insurance. And so I never did see it." And he said, "Well, I can just tell you, when I saw the car, all I could see was the hand of God on your car." He said, "My husband had put a roll bar in the car, which he never had done. That was our 4th Corvette. He'd never done that. And I didn't like it because my seat had to be pushed forward." And he said, "Well, if you really don't like it, when we get home, I'll have him take it out." But he said that roll bar was flattened on his side of the car and pushed into a perfect halo around your head. I had a sprained shoulder. My husband was, well, the top came off the car, you can imagine. He was very badly injured. And so, I think that I figured out that, wait a minute, maybe there was a miracle here, because he asked for going like my dad. So
that is, yeah, and that is amazing. That is mind-blowing and really spiritual and godly. So yeah. I was going to say, in this quarantine, prior to this, I prayed for a lot of things to change, and now quarantine's kind of forced those habits to change. So I guess he's listening one way or another, right?
That's right. That's right. You just got to hold on. We can't control everything.
Right. Well, Jen, thank you so much. And I wish you all the best with this book and this movie and continue projects you're working on.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time.
Give us the website one more time.
Yeah, it's
author-jan-hurst-blogspot.com. All right. And by the way, I'm so glad the storm held out so we could do this.
Yes, thank you so much. It's been fun. Thank you.
All right, Jan Hurst, thanks so much for joining. Again, that book is His Sunrise, My Sunset, and find that on Amazon, Kindle, and elsewhere. His Sunrise, My Sunset by Jan Hurst. Thanks, Jan, for joining us.